Dharma and the Mahatmas. A discussion between Mrs. Radha Burnier, International President of the Theosophical Society, and Miss Joy Mills, Director of the Crotona Institute School of Theosophy in Ojai, California.
Radha, there are so many interesting concepts that have found their way into theosophical literature, into the Western world, in fact, but one of them is a concept that has always interested me very much. That's the idea of Dharma. I understand that this is a really central concept in Hinduism, maybe in in Buddhism too, isn't it?
Yes.
How would you define Dharma?
Dharma is one of those words which have such a rich meaning that it is difficult to give a simple definition of it. One of the meanings is religion in a certain sense of the term. That is why the Sanskrit phrase Satyan Nasti Paro Dharma has been translated as there is no religion higher than truth. And it's a very fine translation. Which
you think this is a really adequate translation of our society's motto?
I think from the point of view of catching the essence of what the phrase says, it's a very good translation. The Hindu religion sometimes has been called Sanatana Dharma, which means...
What is a Sanatana?
The eternal religion.
Oh yes,
and
yes.
It is not really Hindu religion, but the wisdom religion that HPB wrote about, which is implied by the term Sanatana Dharma.
Sometimes Dharma has been translated as law or as duty. Would they be acceptable in any way?
Yes, certainly. That's all part of the meaning. Dharma implies doing the right thing. So you can say it's duty, but you can also say it's a question of having a sense of responsibility.
Oh, yes.
For one's surroundings, for the people with whom one comes into contact, to society itself, to human society. And along with it, there is the concept of each person having his own special duty in life, because each person is in a particular situation. And therefore, what he has to do can be right only for himself. And
how would that, though, relate to religion? Of course, religion, as I'm sure you know, here in the West, has such a connotation of a formalized structure, creed even, of course, church. All of these things come to mind when one uses that term religion. And even in some of HPB's writings, as well as the writings of her teachers, there's a kind of condemnation of religion. So how would what you're saying about Dharma relate to religion and make religion then, shall we say, what it should be genuinely, what it really is in essence?
I don't think it would relate to religion in a formal sense at all. You know, Dr. Besant said in many lectures, and others I'm sure have said it, that the essence of spirituality is the sense of unity.
Yes.
The HPB says that religion per se is that which unites all beings in one whole. Now, I think this perception of unity is connected with the sense of doing what is right.
If there is that sense of unity, one naturally then does what is right.
Exactly.
Yes.
And that is, in fact, religion in a different sense.
In a different sense, in the true sense, then, in the reunification of ourselves, ourselves with the universe, with each other.
Quite.
I see. So.
And in Buddhism, the word dharma has been used very often to mean the essential nature of a thing.
Yes.
You can see the link
yes,
there too.
I see the link there very easily, yes,
Yes.
because there's spoken of the Dharma nature of every sentient being.
Yes.
And now with that, in Buddhism, that Dharma nature would be the same throughout the universe? Would it be the original source, would you say? That which we share in common?
Each entity or each individual existence has its own dharma, its own essential nature. But the essential nature is the same and yet not quite
and yet
the same.
Not quite the same. I suppose this is one of the great paradoxes, that there is both the common source. Would that be recognized in Buddhism?
I think so. When they spoke about alaya, dharmakaya, and used such words, they spoke about a common ground or substratum from which everything derives its true nature.
But then the Dharma nature would also be the distinctness within that. Is there a certain distinctness? How would you phrase it? I realize it's paradoxical.
As you say, it's paradoxical. That is the marvel of life, that everything is from the same source. Everything is of the same essence. And yet it seems to reveal newness everywhere. So that there is no repetition.
That's a tremendous mystery, isn't
Yes,
it?
it is.
But a very wonderful mystery if we can really perceive it. So that in a society, for example, like the Theosophical Society, where we speak of no distinctions and recognize, the Theosophical worldview certainly recognizes a unitary source, but this does not mean uniformity.
No.
Would you?
On the other hand, perhaps it is the ultimate in creativity.
Yes.
And therefore it is all the time new.
So if one acts from that, there's a certain spontaneity, creativity, freshness.
Exactly.
I see. A kind of purity then. I presume then that when you say, as you did a moment ago, that when you do the right thing, how do we know the right? This I've often been asked this. Well, you speak of the right thing. How do you know what is the right thing?
I think till a person reaches the stage of enlightenment, which is the same as becoming at one with all existence, he can only know up to a point what is the right thing. And perhaps for each person, there is a right thing at his stage, which means doing what will carry him on to the next step in his own progress.
I suppose then it would be at that point, as it were, that karma enters in, that there's a relationship between dharma and karma.
Yes.
Karma, because if the action, which has seemed right, I may act out of my own best judgment, out of the background of my experience, all of this leads me to act. If it has not been fully right, then I pay the consequences,
Yes,
as it were.
it will bring certain experiences which will help you to go forward if you are ready to understand what the lesson is.
Yes. So there is a relationship then between karma and dharma.
Of course there is.
It would have to be.
And there is also, I think, dharma or a responsibility for every position and function in life, apart from the individual.
This, I suppose, is what is exemplified in the Bhagavad Gita, isn't it?
Yes.
That the dharma of Arjuna, as a man faced with a tremendous problem, but coming from a certain background, had a particular responsibility which he could not evade.
Yes, that is, a person who is a king or an administrator, let us say, has to fulfill his responsibility in that particular position, has to find out what is right, whatever his own individual temperament may be. That is also the karma. The karma has brought him
to that position, brought him into that.
Yes.
Yes, of course. Radha, I'd like to turn to another subject because it's a question that comes up very, very often. As you're well aware, there are so many different, shall we say, spiritual groups or pseudo occult groups, groups that have teachings which in some way at times seems to relate to the Theosophical teachings. And we're frequently asked, in the Theosophical Society, we look to H.P. Blavatsky, and I'm not speaking now of those who look at her as an authority, heaven forbid,
Yes.
The final word. But in that regard, we also have this concept that there were her teachers, and we have that wonderful correspondence which took place between the two Englishmen, Mr. Sinnett and Mr. Hume, known as the Mahatma letters. Yes. I think this whole matter of who is or a Mahatma or what constitutes a Mahatma really needs to be clarified. Perhaps there's a Dharma in that too. How would you define who were these teachers to whom she herself referred?
I think they themselves have made this fairly clear. A real teacher must be a person, first of all, who has universal compassion. And if you read the correspondence between Sinnett and the Mahatmas,
yes,
this comes out very clearly. The call of the world to them, the world which needs enlightenment, and their response to it is so very prominent.
It is. That is so true. It does come through in the letters,
yes,
very much.
And the whole life of the Buddha also, perhaps of other great teachers, reflects it. You know the story of how Buddha was in this palace which his father had created,
yes,
and he hears the cry of the world.
Yes.
It is so beautiful a symbol.
It is, indeed. It really
yes.
is.
So only a person who has become totally sensitive to the needs of the world, morally, spiritually, and of course in other ways, I think can be a teacher.
Why then, this is a question that's been asked of me, perhaps it's been asked of you when you lecture around. Why then, hearing this cry of suffering humanity, do not the Mahatmas, or masters, we refer to them in our literature as masters of wisdom, masters of compassion, why don't they come into the world? Why don't they, come out and do some things?
I think it is because till a person has become capable of receiving teaching, being in contact with a teacher does him no good at all.
Yes.
That is why perhaps the world has so often repudiated teachers as the people around Jesus did. And to hear a message means that one must become spiritual, one's spiritual discrimination must awaken. And I think this also points to one of the great differences between the pseudo teacher and the real one, that the real teacher tries to awaken intelligence, to use Krishnamurti's phrase, and not to dominate, to impose ideas, to make people subservient to them, but they encourage each one to inquire, to think for himself, to find out for himself, and to recognize the truth.
That certainly comes across in reading the Mahatma letters, the constant emphasis that while they presented a teaching to Mr.
Yes.
Sinnett, that Sinnett was to inquire, he was to probe, he was to ask questions, wasn't he?
Yes. In fact, they want people to become self-reliant and non-dependent, and while the conventional religion does the opposite.
Does the opposite. This leads, in a sense, back to Dharma, because would you say then that what the masters, the genuine Mahatmas, encourage us to do is to understand our own Dharma, that is our own, take our own responsibility. You used the word responsibility.
Yes.
Perhaps in another way that's self-reliance, isn't it?
Yes. I think there is also another very important point to realize, that is a true teacher, an enlightened man, is liberated from selfishness.
There's an utter simplicity, would you say?
Yes, and purity.
And purity.
Yes, complete purity. Purity is purity from self-centeredness, everything that has to do with the separative nature. And also that Dharma implies step by step learning to be less self-centered and selfish, and widening one's heart and mind till one becomes universal in one's attitudes. That is why the Mahatmas said that affinity alone can draw you near to us.
What kind of affinity then?
This purity that we spoke about.
Purity of heart as well
purity of heart and altruistic attitudes. So
does this mean just sort of doing good? I mean, you know, being the do-gooders of the world, and
I don't think so. It is much deeper.
Much deeper,
because one can do good outwardly and yet be jealous, competitive, not do the right thing by one's family, but be kind to people outside. Yes.
You know, that raises an interesting point, Radha, that there's a place where HPB makes the statement, it may be in the Key to Theosophy, that the most benefit is that one should give oneself to the poor. One would not do it through a third party, as it were.
Yes.
Now, of course, here it's very difficult. I get appeals from organizations. Let's just take one, Oxfam, to help with the hungry children in Ethiopia. Now, I can't go to Ethiopia and feed them, so I send a check.
Yes.
Now, according to HPB, maybe I'm not doing it correctly. Maybe I'm not being properly altruistic.
I think much depends on the motive, the inner condition. And to be pure, one has to have a great deal of self-awareness. See the subtle feelings and thoughts which go on inside, because it's so easy to give with the hands, write out a check, or even go somewhere.
Or even go somewhere and do it,
do something. And yet inside, at a subtle level perhaps, nourish thoughts which are of the self.
So you're saying that altruism is really very, very much deeper and much, what shall we say, more comprehensive than these external actions, which are all very well and good, and of course may help suffering humanity, but genuine purity, genuine compassion, genuine altruism is a much deeper, perhaps all-pervasive,
radical change which takes place inside.
Yes, a kind of inner revolution in which one's whole being then is different.
That is exactly what happens when a person becomes a liberated individual.
And that is the Mahatma.
Yes, that is the Mahatma.
Now, you know, some people in reading the Mahatma letters have said, well, why couldn't they have foreseen some of the difficulties, or some of the very fact that some people even turned against them? They're not all seeing, are they? They're, in the sense of being able to prevent something from occurring.
I think they may be all seeing when they use their powers, But within each individual, there are different possibilities. Otherwise, you have to accept a deterministic pattern in the universe.
That's
so the human being at least has choice. He, at every moment, he has to use his discrimination and proceed in a certain way. And all that I think they do is to watch over it, not make him do something, because then he would just be a robot carrying out instructions.
Yeah.
And that is not the awakening of the intelligence that we spoke about.
Yes.
Perhaps it would be very easy for them to use powers to change everything, but that is not desirable. Humanity has to learn, like a little child has to learn to walk.
But they are available, in a sense, to help.
Yes.
Perhaps for guidance. In a sense.
A mother won't put a child into confinement because he doesn't walk properly and hurts himself.
Yes.
She allows him to walk, but watches over.
Watches over him. I think that in one way then, although it seems we've been talking about two unrelated subjects, in one way they're very closely related, aren't they?
Yes, I
Dharma
think so.
And the possibility of becoming the liberated individual, and therefore the fact that there are those who have entered a kind of consciousness, can we call it that, a consciousness of which we can call the liberated consciousness, the free,
I think the Hindu idea is very helpful here, because they say that the human being in the beginning is just searching for pleasure and possessions. That is called karma and artha. These become the aims of life.
Oh, yes.
You see that happen.
You see that, of course.
Then some kind of an awakening takes place, and he thinks more in terms of responsibility. So even at the cost of his own pleasure or of his possessions, he may perform his duty, be kind, etc. But a stage comes beyond that when he is liberated. This is moksha, when he doesn't have to think of alternatives. This is the choiceless condition.
The choiceless choice.
Because he is so fully aware of the good of all beings and so unified with everything that spontaneously, by his very nature, he does the right thing. And that is action out of love.
That's a wonderful summary, Radha. Thank you very much. I think this has been an exciting, interesting discussion, which we could carry on, of course, and I would hope that it has awakened ideas that can be really probed more deeply.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Radha.